Representing Universities Canada in person, Mr. Gabriel Miller, President and Chief Executive Officer. Representing by video conference the Toronto Police Chief, District Chief Robert Johnson, Deputy Chief, and Detective Sergeant Kiram Bisla, Acting Detective Sergeant. Each of the four will have up to 5 minutes of opening remarks, after which we will proceed with the rounds of questions. I will indicate by raising the card that there's only 30 minutes left. If you don't see it, I will probably end up needing to interrupt you when the time is up, and I will be fair with all witnesses alike and all members, of course. So thank you very much. And with that, we will commence, and I will ask Madame Gladue to please start with 6 minutes.
Witnesses are going to testify.
Oh, yes, of course. I've already skipped the witnesses. Aren't you lucky? Okay. So in order that I have them on my piece of paper, with 5 minutes, please, to Mr. Sandler.
Thank you. Good morning. On October the 7th, life completely changed for Canadian Jews, not simply because Israel had been the victim yet again of terrorist brutalities directed against helpless citizens, but because almost immediately and before a single Israeli soldier set foot in Gaza, on Canadian streets and campuses, faculty members and students, union leaders and known jihadists celebrated and glorified Hamas's barbarities. The murdered included Israeli-Canadian Vivian Silver, a well-respected peace activist involved, amongst other things, in ferrying children from Gaza to Israeli hospitals. What perversity of ideology, human behavior, and appalling ignorance explains the glorification and martyrdom of those who torture, behead, rape women, and burn Jews alive, and in Canada, or of those who brag about how many Jews they've slaughtered? Canadian Jews, I can tell you, are depressed, angry, frustrated, and puzzled by the normalization of hatred directed against them. Don't tell Canadian Jews that these are isolated instances of hate when large numbers of protesters march behind a banner that says, "by any means necessary," with a picture of a weapon being brandished. Don't tell Jews that there's a benign interpretation of "from the river to the sea, Palestine shall be free," language that mirrors that of a genocidal, Jew-hating, jihadist terrorist organization, especially when just 2 days ago, a large march on Toronto's streets included not only the responsive chanting of that phrase, but also "the only solution is intifada revolution." We don't want two states. Bring us back to 1948. And the chanting of Sinwar's name, Hamas's leading war criminal. Don't tell Jews this isn't about anti-Semitism or that it's only about protected speech. When students and radicalized faculty say all Zionists are evil, all Zionists are racist, all Zionists are genocidal, the vast majority of Jews are Zionist and many of us pro-Palestinian. I believe, without a trace of humility perhaps, that I've done more as an advocate to advance the rights of Palestinians than any of the people who are protesting in the way that I've described. Don't tell Jews that their children are safe in their schools and universities. Read, for example, the shocking brief of Ottawa against anti-Semitism. In public school, teachers erasing Israel from the map and replacing it with Palestine. Students giving presentations praising Hitler's leadership, saying he only failed because he didn't finish the job. A student at a graduation ceremony changing the indigenous land acknowledgement by blaming Jews for killing all her people. The principal didn't feel this was problematic. Students playing Choke the Jew, being threatened with a knife, shoved to the muddy floor of a yellow school bus and told to taste what their grandparents tasted in the Holocaust, and told by their teachers to just let it go. Don't tell Jewish women that they are safe on campuses. Read the equally shocking brief of the Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism, who experienced the worst forms of misogynistic Jew hatred. Zionist hooer, fucking child abuser for having Zionist babies, rich Jewish bitch, you ought to be raped. These are our TMU students. Don't tell Canadian Jews that these are isolated instances. The data shows the opposite. I'm speaking to you in my personal capacity as someone who has combated anti-Semitism and other forms of hate, including anti-Black, anti-LGBTQ, anti-Indigenous, and indeed anti-Muslim hate for almost 40 years. However, I also invited over 40 groups, organizations, and individuals who are deeply concerned about anti-Semitism to come together in an alliance combating campus anti-Semitism to share their experience and expertise and recommendations with you. And they all responded. You'll read Indigenous, Muslim, Catholic perspectives, teachers, students at all levels, doctors, lawyers, faculty, academics, a media monitor, community NGOs, extremism experts, and those who are working with me on a national respectful dialogue on campuses between Muslim and Jews. And I'll conclude the oral comments by saying I've identified for you, trying to draw together everything you've heard, 10 reasons why overt anti-Semitism is so pervasive in Canada. I hope those will be of assistance to you, as well as 14 concrete recommendations to address that anti-Semitism.
Thank you, Mr. Sandler, and we'll get back to your recommendations.
Thank you.
Madame Sapiria, please, by video conference, you have up to 5 minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for inviting me here today. My name is Cheryl Sapiria, and I am the CEO of Secure Canada, a nonprofit organization originally founded by Canadian victims of terror. Our mission is to combat terrorism, extremism, and related threats to Canada's national security and democracy by creating innovative and transformative laws, policies, and alliances. We are also a member of the informal coalition called the Alliance Against Campus Anti-Semitism in Canada. Secure Canada is not a Jewish organization, and anti-Semitism is not referenced in our mandate. But it has become increasingly clear that anti-Semitism is evolving into a national and global security threat, thereby placing this issue squarely within our mandate. Anti-Semitism is a key entry point for radicalizing, joining extremist groups, and mobilizing to violence. Anti-Semitism underpins ideologically motivated violent extremism across the spectrum, from neo-Nazi and white nationalist extremism to far-left extremism to Islamist extremism. The Jewish population may not always be the target, but anti-Semitism is used to leverage people's vulnerabilities and grievances and to bind a wide array of conspiratorial thinking. There are different factors that can make someone more vulnerable to becoming an extremist. Sometimes there are mental health considerations, or they may be socially disconnected, or maybe they have experienced some past domestic trauma. Then they start intersecting with the hateful ideology online, where they read that their lives are so unhappy because of the Jews. Here come the anti-Semitic conspiracy theories and an us versus them narrative. And they read it enough times in enough different places, and they think, Jewish people have taken over. I need to be part of a movement that is going to fight back. For disenchanted young adults in particular, this is a template that makes their problems make sense. It has now been more than 7 months since the October 7th attacks by Hamas, and there are some new radicalization trends emerging in Ontario. First, younger kids are getting radicalized, as young as 12 and 13. Second, the extremist ideologies are fusing together, so you are now seeing Islamists who also love Hitler. And third, there is a new breed of extremist that hates 5 things: Jews, women, democracy, police, and transgendered people. We are living in a globalized world, so it is hard to isolate homegrown Canadian variables from foreign variables that are inflaming today's anti-Semitism. But it is worth exploring both elements. A current notable area of research is the foreign funding of North American universities. An organization called ISGAP has found that a massive influx of foreign donations to American colleges, much of it from authoritarian regimes, supports heightened levels of intolerance towards Jews, open inquiry, and free expression. One of Secure Canada's board members is the renowned UK-based counter-extremism expert named Haris Rafiq. Mr. Rafiq notes that Qatar has spent up to $1 trillion to spread soft power influence and Islamist indoctrination, which at its very core is anti-Semitic and the bedrock of the ideology of terrorist entities such as Hamas, ISIS, and Al-Qaeda. Russia and China, meanwhile, appear to be manipulating public opinion by promoting anti-Islam
Madame la Présidente, un point d'ordre.
Point of order, Madam Chair, we can't hear the witness. Yes, we can't hear her either, Mr. Fortin. Just one moment, please.
Okay, parfait. Madame Superior, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. And
I
am
stopped the
back, and I'm
clock when
very-
you froze. You've got 1 minute and 30 seconds left.
Thank you. Can you just let me know what you last heard in case I wasn't fully heard? Okay.
Foreign
I'll just keep
funding
going
for
from-
universities in the States. Madame Gladue, merci beaucoup.
Okay, so that was quite a while ago. Gosh, okay.
Madam Chair, I might be able to
Did
help.
you?
She had something said about Islamism being at the heart of anti-Semitism. That was the last note that I have on my paper.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Russia and China, meanwhile, appear to be manipulating public opinion by promoting anti-Israel messaging online. Whether foreign-funded or not, North American universities must find a way to start dismantling the pervasive and destructive academic paradigm in which Jews and Israelis are portrayed as today's ultimate embodiment of evil: white, rich, privileged, racist, colonizing oppressors. There are also homegrown dimensions to Canada's anti-Semitism and extremism problem. It is worth researching whether a minimization of Canadian national identity and values, coupled with a high usage of identity politics, renders young people, both on and off university campuses, more vulnerable to charismatic recruiters looking to radicalize and recruit new members for their extremism cause. Put another way, a strong Canadian identity, based in part on respect for liberal democratic values and a clear rejection of intolerant authoritarian values, may help to create the resilience that is needed to inoculate against radicalization. The government, through CRA, must take a robust stand against charities and nonprofits that promote extremism or that have connections to terrorist groups. It is confounding that a group like Samidoun is a registered nonprofit in Canada rather than a listed terrorist group. The IRGC may not have charitable status here, but the government's refusal to designate them as a terrorist group, while members of the Iranian regime continue to be found in Canada, creates a culture of impunity. Speaking of impunity, a new group called Lawyers for Secure Immigration points out the absence of enforcement
So,
activity.
Madame Superior,
against
thank you. We'll come back to you during questioning. Thank you very much. We will now continue with Mr. Miller, please, for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. Je m'appelle Gabriel Miller et je suis le président.
My name is Gabriel Miller, and I am the CEO of Universities Canada. We are the federal and international voice of Canadian universities.
Universities Canada. I can be certain there will never be another issue more important than the one we're here to discuss today. I want to begin by thanking the committee for undertaking this important and timely study, and even more importantly, I want to thank the Jewish students and scholars who have bravely shared their painful stories. I'm sorry for what you've endured. We hear you, and we take this very seriously. Universities Canada unequivocally condemns anti-Semitism and all forms of racism and discrimination. Hateful, anti-Semitic acts have no place on our campuses or in our communities. They must be stopped. Learning on a supportive campus, free from harassment, intimidation, or fear for one's safety is critical for students and for the integrity of our institutions. The academic environment should foster freedom of expression, and with that comes the freedom to confront opinions or statements we may find misguided or offensive. However, students must feel secure attending university, to learn, and to participate fully in campus life. As a national organization at Universities Canada, we've been acting recently in 4 main areas. 1, working with public safety and the RCMP to help ensure the physical safety of students, staff, and faculty. 2, preventing hate and anti-Semitic acts through campus codes of conduct, which should, by definition, help protect Jewish students. 3, sharing best practices and lessons among institutions and the community. 4, working with 27 universities to detail the specific actions they are taking to fight anti-Semitism in response to a December 13th request from MPs. Universities Canada is working closely with Deborah Lyons, the Department of Public Safety, the RCMP, local MPs, and community-led organizations such as the Network of Engaged Canadian Academics, the Centre for Israel and Jewish Affairs, and B'nai B'rith Canada. We are also in close contact with our international counterparts like Universities UK and the American Council on Education. We are listening carefully to Jewish students and scholars and to leaders in the fight against anti-Semitism. We welcome the practical, concrete solutions that have been presented to this committee. Proposals to ensure equal application of codes of conduct, EDI policies that fight anti-Semitism and protect Jewish students, faculty, and staff, new education and training programs, more extensive data collection and reporting, and broadening the use of the non-binding IRA definition as a valuable tool to help universities identify and address anti-Semitism. We are committed to working with you, with governments, and Jewish partners to address these recommendations. We know from police reports and annual audits that incidents of anti-Semitism have been steadily rising in Canada. And as many who have appeared before the committee have rightly pointed out, if anti-Semitism is not stopped wherever it's found, it spreads, it grows. We cannot forget the lessons of history when it comes to how unchecked hateful language too easily progresses to more hateful actions. These problems do not stop at the edge of campus. Anti-Semitism affects our whole society and demands a national, whole-of-government response. It is not a partisan issue either, and I hope members will continue to approach this study and the resulting report with a multi-partisan approach. Les universités ont la responsabilité particulière.
Universities have a particular responsibility to be a model of dialogue and respectful conduct. This responsibility not only extends to our students, our personnel, and our professors, but also to leaders in the Canadian community as a whole. It is our duty to do everything we can to stop and avoid anti-Semitism, just as it behooves all elected officials and directors to do the same thing.
Answering your questions.
Merci. Merci beaucoup. Alors, on commence.
Thank you very much. So we'll begin the first round.
Dear Lord. It took me 12 to 13 hours to come from Halifax this morning, so here we go. Now with our last presenter, I will ask Chief Johnson to please use 5 minutes, however he wishes, with his colleague. Thank you.
So I think Detective Sergeant Karen Bisla will start, and we had a little bit longer than 5 minutes. I will wrap up with the 4 recommendations. Karen, if you want to go ahead.
Thank you, sir. It's truly a privilege to speak before you today and share with you information relating to the service's hate crime unit, its mandate, how the service investigates and responds to hate crime, the significant 47% increase in hate crime reporting in 2023, and the extensive community outreach education efforts made by the service in an effort to address and combat hate crimes. It is important to note that not all police services have a dedicated hate crime unit, and how police respond to hate-motivated crimes differs from service to service. The hate crime unit was established in 1993 and is responsible for collecting statistical data and ensuring the thorough investigation of hate crime offenses within the City of Toronto. Since its inception, the hate crime unit has been embedded with the security section of intelligence services. This placement is by design, as hate crimes can be precursors to violent extremism in the forms of criminal extremism and terrorism, 2 areas of investigation falling under the security section mandate. This enables mutually supportive actions in circumstances where investigations of hate crime and violent extremism overlap. The investigation of hate crimes is a Toronto Police Service priority. Hate crime laws are complex because determining motivation of bias, prejudice, or hate can be difficult, and context is key. An essential part of the hate crime unit's mandate is to provide internal training to its member and assist in the development of public education programs in partnership with other members of the service and the community. In 2023-2024, the hate crime unit delivered training to new recruits, dispatchers, auxiliary officers, and members of the public safety unit who are especially trained to respond at public protests and demonstrations. These efforts help to ensure that police officers and community members are able to recognize hate crimes and work collaboratively to ensure that these crimes do not go unreported. The reporting of hate crimes is essential because it helps to identify trends and patterns across the city, which then informs service-wide strategies such as hate crime prevention, community outreach, and public education. Other aspects of the Hate Crime Unit mandate include conducting investigations, assisting and providing expertise to all hate crime and hate propaganda investigations and prosecutions, providing follow-up and assistance in regards to all hate-related incidents to victims of hate crime in the affected communities, attending demonstrations and gathering evidence and investigating any suspected hate crimes or hate speech or signage. As you may be aware, a very high threshold must be met to lay hate propaganda charges, which require the consent of the Attorney General of Ontario. The Hate Crime Unit liaises regularly with the Ministry of the Attorney General's Specialized Hate Crime Working Group in relation to hate crime investigations and seeks AG consent in relation to hate propaganda charges as required. The Hate Crime Unit also facilitates the exchange of information through its internal networks and with various law enforcement agencies at the provincial, national, and international levels. This includes co-hosting weekly meetings with the province's hate crime and extremism investigative team, a continued partnership with the RCMP and the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, and taking part in national and international summits, including last year's Eradicate Hate Global Summit in Pittsburgh, to share ideas and build working relationships between subject matter experts and various government agencies, community leaders, academics, and law enforcement members. The Hate Crime Unit is also responsible for reviewing, classifying, recording all reported hate-motivated occurrences. The classification of hate crimes is based on the criteria set in the Criminal Code and guidelines set by the Canadian Centre of Justice and Community Safety Statistics. This coming Friday, the service will be presenting its 2023 Annual Hate Crime Statistical Report to the Toronto Police Service Board. With the exception of 2022, the number of reported hate crimes has been steadily increasing since 2018. There are multiple factors that can affect the fluctuation in the number of reported hate crimes in the different community groups that are victimized, including geopolitical events, heightened awareness stemming from community educational programs, hate crime training, and increased media coverage. In 2023, the service experienced a 47% increase in reported hate crimes compared to 2022, from 248 to 365. Over the past 10 years, between 2012 and 2022, the average number of reported hate crimes has been approximately 174 per year. The ongoing Middle East conflict that escalated after the events of October 7, 2023 is a significant contributing factor to the increase in reporting. In 2023, the increases in reported hate crime in the following victimized categories were as follow. Anti-Semitic occurrences increased from 65 in 2022 to 135 occurrences in 2023. Anti-Muslim, anti-Palestinian, anti-Arab occurrences increased from 12 in 2022 to 36 in 2023. Anti-2S LGBTQ+ reported hate crimes increased from 40 in 2022 to 65 occurrences in 2023. There was a 32% increase in the number of reported hate crimes after October 7th during the months of October, November, and December in 2023 compared to the same time period in 2022. Mischief to property offenses were the highest reported.
Detective Bisla will come back to you. So thank you for the opening remarks.
Point of order, Chair.
Yes.
I think they believe that they had more time. If I can get unanimous consent on the committee to hear the 4 recommendations.
Fabulous. Thank you very much. Please continue.
Thank you. The number of arrests related to hate crimes in 2023 increased from 46 persons in 2022 to 59 persons.
Madam Chair, point of order.
Please hold on.
I think
Madam.
the consensus was just to hear the 4 recommendations. Am I correct?
Okay. Thank you.
Yes, the 4 recommendations, please.
Okay. So the first one is obviously in the purview of the province, given that they're responsible for policing. The 3 might be appropriate within this forum. So the first one is the creation of dedicated hate crime units, mandating a hate crime course for investigators and culturally sensitive training, which will provide service members with the foundational knowledge about the practice of religions such as Judaism and Islam, as well as enhanced understanding of the community impact of hate crimes, and will ensure a consistent investigative approach. The second one is adopting a standardized definition of hate crime and conducting community consultations to better understand the definition, and controversial slogans is recommended. We know that in speaking with community and our officers that there is a sense of frustration around the lack of clarity as to what constitutes a hate incident as opposed to a hate crime or hate propaganda. A commitment to ongoing education and training for our officers will assist the public and the police in this regard. The third one is AG consent to be removed as a prerequisite for laying hate crime charges. The rationale is to unleash the power of the common law to evolve the rules around acceptable speech and conduct. Also, banning certain flags or symbols should be considered. And the fourth one is the list of banned organizations as they fund terror and hate should be updated as many new groups have surfaced since October 7th. Thank you.
Thank you very much. On commence maintenant avec nos premiers tours.
We'll start with the first round with 6 minutes for each member. Ms. Gladue.
Chair, and thank you to all of the witnesses for being here to discuss this very, very serious and important topic. In my role as the critic for civil liberties, I'm hearing from across the country concerns that the rule of law is not being enforced equally, especially when we consider anti-Semitic incidents that are happening. So I want to start with the Toronto Police Services, and I'm just going to go through a number of the incidents that have gone on so that you can give us a picture of what's really happening there. Starting with, at Christmas time in the Eaton Centre, there was a pro-Palestinian demonstration where death threats were made to the police and shoppers were intimidated and harassed. Were there any arrests made as a result of that?
Yes, there were.
Very good. Then there was the Avenue Road blocking of the ramp where hundreds of people were gathered, and the media had reported that Tim Hortons coffees were brought to the protesters. But the question is, I mean, it's illegal to block roads. How many of those hundreds of protesters were arrested then?
We did arrest a number of protesters. The exact number I don't have. Kieran, maybe you have it there. And there were subsequent conditions that were placed on those individuals, and as a result of the continued protests, we changed our response and footprint around that bridge. Karen, do you have any of the statistical information on that?
I believe the numbers were 6. I would have to confirm that, though.
Oh, that's great. And any of these things you can send to the clerk afterwards if you don't have the information right with you. How many arrests for hate crime have been made since October 7th of 2023?
Karen?
Yes, I do have those numbers in front of me, and those are, I have 59 in total, and I can certainly provide a number of arrests that were made after October 7th.
One of the concerns I hear is that, especially in incidents like the Mount Sinai blocking of University Avenue in front of the hospital, that it's very difficult for the police with the resources that they have to deal with the situation. Have there been any requests made for supplementary resources either from the province or from the federal government? And if so, what was that response?
So I can tell you, we do work with our partners. All the GTA services has helped us with policing personnel to police the protests that are both spontaneous and planned. The province as well has been very receptive to providing resources through the Ontario Provincial Police. So we have had help from our neighboring police organizations.
Okay, and my other question is, we've seen a lot of intimidation, vandalism of small businesses, and also incidents happening on university campuses. Are the Toronto Police able to take action when crimes are committed on university campuses or in front of small businesses?
Yes, if it's a criminal offense, we do take action and investigate those occurrences. With respect to the University of Toronto, we are working with the administration and the campus security, campus police there. When reports of criminal activity occur and they take an occurrence, if they send it to us, we will engage in the investigation, as well as if individual members who might have been the victim of a crime on university campus come to us directly, we do take that report and investigate it.
Excellent. I think it's critically important, your role in making sure that people do know that the rule of law will be enforced and that, violence and intimidation, harassment, these things will just not be tolerated. I want to turn to Ms. Sapiria from Secure Canada. You were talking about the concern about foreign actors being involved in some of the activities of the protests. Do we have evidence in Canada of foreign actors that are influencing these pro-Palestinian demonstrations at Canadian universities?
That is a very good question, and it's a very salient one right now. There's a lot of research being done to understand where the funding is coming, because there is a wide acceptance that the protests from the beginning were much too organized and much too well funded to be these organic, spontaneous, local demonstrations. So that is something that hopefully in the coming weeks and months we will have a great deal of research on.
Very good. And I noted that you mentioned some of the extremist groups and the IRGC that need to be added to the list of designated terrorists in Canada. And I think the police services recommendation contained that as well. So I would ask if both of you could submit that through the clerk, the lists of those organizations that you believe should be added in order to protect. That would be great. Now I'm going to turn to Mr. Miller and talk about the universities in Canada. Well, it seems to me that all of them have codes of conduct, and that students can be censored. So the question is, are they enforcing their codes of conduct, or are the protests that happen on campuses actually not students but other actors?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you very much for the question. To start, I think it's important to say that what we've been hearing in our conversations with Jewish students and leaders in the past several weeks is how important it is that these codes of conduct be enforced in a way that's equal to all groups and provides protection to all groups, including, of course, members of our Jewish community. And that's the message that's being delivered by the community to our university leaders. Universities are using all of their policies, including codes of conduct, to ensure that the proper standards are upheld. But of course, there is a lot of work to do. We've seen examples, I think, where clearly we're letting our Jewish students and faculty down, and that there's a great deal of work to do to improve our performance.
We will continue with Mr. Mandashino for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you to the witnesses for attending this morning. This committee has heard disturbing evidence from Jewish Canadians from just about every generation going back to the post-Second World War period. Their testimony is clear and consistent. Jews are being targeted at every turn. Students, professors, professionals, business owners, public servants, union members, faith leaders, families. Just last weekend, the shooting at Bias Haya Jewish Day School for Girls in North York, in my hometown of Toronto. Another horrifying incident to add to the record levels of anti-Semitic violence against Jews, as documented by B'nai B'rith. Imagine having to send your daughter off to school this morning knowing that there are people who want to attack her. And all you want to do is assure her that she's going to be safe. But how can Jews feel safe when laws aren't enforced? When encampments go on for weeks without consequence? Or like in the case of Adil Sharkoui in Montreal, who explicitly demonized Zionists and incited violence, there are no charges. Jews can't feel safe. They don't feel safe. And the consequences are real. More unlawful protests, more violence, more Jew hatred. This study has to be a call to action for all Canadians to put on our gear, pick up a hose, and extinguish the five-alarm fire that is anti-Semitism in this country. This morning, I want to focus on a written submission from Canadian Women Against Anti-Semitism. This is a grassroots organization in Toronto. Their written deputation explains in vivid detail the impacts of anti-Semitism on Jewish women. And they make two key points. First, that the word Zionists has been misappropriated and perverted as a racist trope against Jews. And second, that sexual violence against women and girls is explicitly being coupled with Jewish hatred. We see this specifically on university encampments where there are repeated denials of the raping and torturing of women by Hamas, along with chants like "Long live October 7th," glorifying terrorism and, by extension, the violence done to women on that day. The deputation even makes reference to a 6-year-old girl, who was told that she should be raped by Hitler, and that all Jews should die. Mr. Sandler, you're an expert in the criminal law, but you don't have to be an expert to conclude that these are prima facie examples of hate speech. Am I correct about that?
Absolutely correct.
And that any student on any campus alleged to have uttered such hate speech warrants at a minimum an investigation by universities under their respective codes of conduct. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely.
To your knowledge, has any student been the subject of a disciplinary investigation warranting their expulsion to date?
I'm unaware of very much activity on this front at all, frankly.
My question next is for
And I'm aware of many instances where no action's been taken.
Indeed, so am I, and we've heard it from Jewish students themselves. My question next is for Mr. Miller. On behalf of Universities Canada, can you inform members of this committee whether or not any disciplinary proceedings have been commenced on the grounds that students have committed some of the hate speech that we've heard directly from Jewish students themselves?
Well, I want to start just by echoing your message, which is that the kind of language and behavior that you're describing is absolutely intolerable, offensive. It needs to be eradicated, and we need to work much, much harder
The
to protect
expression
our...
of solidarity, my question is whether or not any disciplinary proceedings have been commenced thus far.
I'd be happy to follow up with the committee with specific examples. I know that universities are working with their codes of conduct, and what they've heard from Jewish students and faculty is these codes of conduct need to be applied more equally so that they protect all members of the community, and there's certainly more work to do there.
Mr. Sandler, I see you would like to come back.
Well, I don't want to ignore the fact that we have radicalized professors and faculty and would not simply focus on students. And there's jurisprudence that makes it clear that even in the absence of proof of a hate crime, that we are able to deal with, in a disciplinary matter, with faculty who are creating a poisoned environment in their classrooms.
Wholeheartedly agree, and we heard from Dr. Rosenberg just last week, who was previously a teacher at the University of British Columbia Faculty of Medicine, who resigned despite the fact that he had raised repeatedly his concerns around that kind of toxic indoctrination, which we're seeing not only on his campus, but right across the country. And so in addition to that, Mr. Sandler, you've also got experience, as I said, in the criminal justice system. There are many tools that are available to law enforcement. We've heard from Toronto Police Service this morning that as part of an action plan, we need to see more training of police, prosecutors, and members of the judiciary. Do you agree with that, and can you expand?
Not only do I agree with that, but what I am seeing is inconsistent application of the law right across the country. I'm seeing underutilization of various sections of the criminal code that do exist and which I have identified. I've also seen the absence of designated prosecutors to deal with these crimes, so that you're actually having internal disagreement within Crown Services about what is prosecutable and what is not. So we need a national approach that understands anti-Semitism, understands the criminal law tools that are available to deal with it, and applies it across the country.
I've got less than 10 seconds. Is it concerning to you that when individuals who have an interest in seeing these encampments taken down bring applications before the courts for injunctions are being denied?
Response at the next question. Alors, merci beaucoup. Alors, on recommence maintenant.
Thank you very much. We'll start with Mr. Fortin for 6 minutes, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you to the witnesses for being here this morning. This is an important topic that is concerning for all of us, and your help will be vital in finding solutions. I have a question for Chief Johnson and Detective Sergeant Bisley. You talked about 4 recommendations. I like this approach that aims to help and to fix problems. Now, some of the things were obvious, like training, for example, but you also talked about the definition of hate crime. And it's something that concerns me. Maybe one of you could share with us if you have a suggestion for a definition that might be clear. I imagine that you've already thought about this. Mr. Johnson?
I'll start, and then maybe Kieran can jump in. I think the issue is, twofold. It's one, internally with police organizations and police officers, and then more importantly with community, because of misinformation, lack of information. I think this is a complicated issue, and in my recommendation, I mentioned the importance of consultation with community, because I think this is a bit of a moving target, and maybe addressed through some regulations so it can be easily or more easy to change, as things evolve. Karen, would you like to speak to specifics?
Hi, yes. I know there's discussions in Toronto Police Service as part of those discussions with respect to creating a standardized definition that all police services can refer to. It's not standardized at this point, but as part of our work with the RCMP and the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, we are working together with police services to ensure that we have a standard definition. At this time, the definition of a hate crime is a criminal offense committed against a person or property, motivated in whole or in part by the offender's real or perceived bias, prejudice, or hate. And the key is the intentional selection of the victim based on their identifiable group.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you, Ms. Bisla. In your opinion, should all types of hate be treated equally, or should there be a special attention put on anti-Semitism or other types of hate? Is there specific treatment that should be applied to specific types of hate, or do you think all types of hate should be treated or managed the same way?
Well, the law addresses hate in a number of ways in the criminal code. There are specific provisions that speak to anti-Semitism specifically under the hate propaganda legislation.
Madame Bisla. Oui, je comprends.
Sorry, Ms. Bisla, I understand my time is running out. I don't want to be rude. I understand that there are definitions in the criminal code, but maybe I can be a little more specific in my question. In the criminal code, there's a provision. It's 319 that says that nobody can be found guilty of anti-Semitism if the statement was made in good faith, it's an opinion on a religious topic or on a religious text, or that they're using arguments. So my question is, in your opinion, is this type of exception where it says you can express hate if it's based on a religious text, is this an exception that we should maintain, or should we review that?
There are defenses available in the criminal code. I am familiar with those defenses, and they are considered, and it's always done on a case-by-case basis. So if you're asking me, do I think those need to be revisited? I think they're appropriate. I think that might be a question that might be better suited for a lawyer as opposed to myself.
My colleague, Mr. Mendicino, just raised situations such as Mr. Sharkawi this winter or last fall, I can't remember exactly when, publicly called on Allah. I can't remember exactly what he said, but the equivalent was what he was saying was that all Jews should die. And so the question was, could Mr. Sharkawi have been found guilty even with the exception in the criminal code? I understand you don't have a specific opinion, but does that type of provision allow for this kind of hate speech? Did you hear? Are you waiting for the interpretation, Ms. Bisla? It's a question to you.
Thank you very much. There is a provision in the criminal code that prohibits advocating genocide. In terms of my opinion regarding a specific situation, I would have to look at all the facts of a case because these are based on context. So I'm not in a position to comment about just a general statement.
Monsieur Johnson, peut-être en quelques secondes.
Mr. Johnson, in a few seconds.
Back to that, Chief. Thank you very much.
Madame la Présidente, point d'ordre.
A point of order, Madam Chair. There's a lot of time that is lost because of the interpretation, and that's fine with me. But if we want to be fair, perhaps we could add 30 seconds to my 6 minutes just to allow for that, because I'm waiting for answers that could be answered immediately if I'd asked the question in English. So I appeal to your sense of justice, Madam Chair. Yes, I am very fair indeed. Yes, I know you are. But now we're going to start with Mr. Garrison.
Madam Chair, I want to start by thanking all the witnesses for being with us on this study. I do believe it's one of the most important things we've embarked on. And in particular, I want to thank Mr. Sandler for being very forthright in placing the situation Canadian Jews face before this committee in a forceful manner. And I know that one of the things you didn't get to was discussion about the 10 reasons why anti-Semitism is so pervasive, because I think it's important we understand where it's coming from if we're going to make recommendations on how to combat it. So I'd like to give you as much time of my time as you need to talk about that.
Thank you. I very much appreciate that. So I've identified the following factors, and I'm happy to elaborate on them as might be necessary. We see the active involvement of extremists and extremist organizations in Canada, which are operating with impunity here. We see foreign money infused into Canada, and we've seen one expert describe Canada as a major hub for extremist financing and money laundering worldwide. We see the misuse of social media by circulating misinformation, anti-Semitic tropes, and historical distortions, and this misuse is orchestrated in many instances by extremists and foreign governments. We see radicalized faculty members who seek to indoctrinate students rather than engage in a discussion where controversial topics are discussed. We see in many classrooms a culture that does not promote respectful dialogue on controversial issues and that does not encourage critical thinking and active listening. We see the confusion and often deliberate obfuscation of the distinction between protected speech and hate speech, designed to immunize those who engage in hate speech or hate activities from accountability. We see the underuse and inconsistent use by law enforcement and prosecution services of existing criminal law tools. And I might say that from my perspective, the issue is less about defining a hate crime, and it's more about training through case scenarios so that police officers actually understand what you do in a specific case situation. And I've worked with the Toronto Police on case scenarios pre-October 7th, and I think it's of critical importance, especially now. The failure by many school administrations to enforce their own codes of conduct to protect students from harm. The use of slogans that incite violence, promote hatred, and mirror unequivocal jihadist language and activities. And finally, mainstream media stories. And I don't bash the media generally, but what I see here is the mainstream media stories that often minimize or ignore pro-Israel perspectives, subject Hamas's assertions to a lower level of scrutiny than Israeli assertions, treat unsupported assertions of fact, and repeatedly fail to correct or give appropriate attention to the disproof or undermining of inflammatory assertions about Israel.
Thank you, Mr. Sandler. I want to ask Mr. Miller, how, I guess frequent, I guess is the right word, how frequently do codes of conduct at the university specifically mention anti-Semitism, and how frequently is anti-Semitism a part of diversity initiatives?
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for the question. These are 2 points that have been raised with us in all of our discussions with Jewish students and leaders. On the first point, we helped collect answers to a question, a letter from MPs to 27 universities that asked this very question. All respondents, I believe Mr. Housefather might correct me, but said that their existing policies would prohibit anti-Semitism. But what we're hearing from students and faculty is that it's the enforcement of those codes of conduct in an equal way where they see institutions falling down. And there's work to do there. And I think better training, picking up on some of Mr. Sandler's point, and better tools for identifying and addressing anti-Semitism will help very much. On EDI, there's work to do here, and quite a bit of work to make sure that EDI frameworks and policies and administrators are protecting all students, and specifically Jewish students and faculty. We have seen examples where changes have already been made, and a commitment from all of our universities to continue making changes to reflect the fact that there's now I think a growing realization that these policies need to do more to protect Jewish Canadians.
Without maybe reinterpreting what you've just said to me, what I hear is that you haven't said anything about whether policies explicitly mention anti-Semitism and specifically protect Jewish students as part of diversity. You haven't really answered that. You've said that universities say their policies would prohibit anti-Semitic acts, but do they specifically address it? Because I think that's a problem with enforcement. If something is not explicitly addressed, then it creates a vacuum.
Well, let me be clear. I think that those policies, and we will be working with our members to make sure that we are explicitly not just documenting that needs to be the case in policy, but communicating it so that Jewish students and faculty know these systems are there for them and that they can access them to protect themselves and feel secure in their campus.
Mr. Sander, would you like to add to that briefly?
Yes, there are codes of conduct that don't address this issue adequately or at all. And I wanted to make a point is if one doesn't adopt the INRA definition of anti-Semitism, then codes of conduct that prohibit anti-Semitism are worthless because it's defined away. And people will describe it as not anti-Semitic and therefore define it out of existence.
Very much. We will now go to our second round, notre deuxième tour, with
Our second round.
to Mr. Van Popta, s'il vous plaît.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to all the witnesses for being with us here today on this very important study on anti-Semitism. Detective Sergeant Bisla, my first question will be for you. You said that the Toronto Police Service takes anti-Semitism very seriously, and I know that you do. And you said that that, in your opinion, hate speech is a precursor to ideologically motivated violent extremism. So in your opinion, what's happening on University of Toronto campus today, is that a precursor to what you would think is ideologically motivated violent extremism?
When I'm talking about those types of examples, I'm talking more in respect to mischief, some of the mischief investigations that the Toronto Police Service has been involved with, flyers being posted and displayed in various areas within Toronto. I'm not speaking specifically to University of Toronto.
Good, thank you. Now, I read in the Globe and Mail this morning that the University of Toronto is seeking an injunction in order to remove the encampment on the university grounds. Are you aware of that? And perhaps you could give us a bit of background.
I am aware of it, but perhaps the deputy might be able to speak a bit further on this.
Thank you, Karen. Yes, we are aware of it. We have been working with the University of Toronto for the last couple of weeks on this issue. We got notified this morning that they are seeking an injunction.
Good, thank you for that. I'm going to move on to Mr. Miller from Universities Canada. You had said in your opening testimony, and Mr. Sandler's also referred to it, the importance of a code of conduct and adopting the era definition of what is anti-Semitism. Now, is that a universally accepted statement across all your universities? And I asked that question in the context of something I read in the New York Times, where authorities at Columbia University are saying it is not our job to define anti-Semitism, it is our job to listen to students. So in that context, or what are your comments?
First, it's very clear that being able to define anti-Semitism is critical to being able to identify and address it. And we've heard very clearly from Jewish leaders and students and faculty that our universities need to have the tools to clearly define and identify anti-Semitism so we can be more effective in addressing it. The question around IRA is one of the most important topics that's been discussed by this group. And there are two things that I think are very encouraging in this area. One is the work by Deborah Lyons, the special envoy, who is working on resources to address questions about how to use IRA, because there are some important questions that we have to answer so that we can bring everyone along in the use of this very valuable tool. And the second, I would say, is the work of the network of engaged Canadian academics who appeared before this committee and have made very clear and done very, very good work in demonstrating the value of that tool, underlying the fact that it is non-binding and that it can be very useful to institutions in academia and outside of academia in fighting anti-Semitism.
Okay, so why is the IRA definition important as opposed to some of the other competing definitions, which maybe don't tie anti-Zionism to anti-Semitism?
I would imagine Mr. Sandler. Yeah. Let's let Mr. Sandler.
Mr. Sandler, then.
So the reason it is of critical importance is this, that anti-Semitism is a cancer, and it metastasizes in different ways through eras. So what are we dealing with now? We're dealing with anti-Semitism in the form of anti-Zionism. This started, I won't give the whole history lesson, but there's a well-documented history of Zionism as racism, started in Russia and propagandized. And we've been fighting that for years because it involves a distortion of Zionism. Zionism is nothing more or less than the right of Jews to have a homeland. It has nothing more to say about that other than our right of self-determination. And it's not inconsistent with Palestinian self-determinism, for example, in a two-state solution. Now, the reason I'm sorry I went on too long, but if I can just then answer your question, and that is that if that definition is not utilized and we exclude anti-Zionism as part of the anti-Semitic picture, then we're not addressing the current form of anti-Semitism that's prevailing on campuses and schools.
So over to you, Madame de Brussen, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you. And I thank all the witnesses. I have to say, one of the challenges I'm facing today, and I'll start with you, Mr. Miller, is that there's a gap between what the students told us at the press conference, what the students told us here in their testimony, and what you're saying, which are very nice words, like they're very reassuring words, but there seems to be a disconnect between what they're experiencing and what you're saying on behalf of universities. And so maybe if I can start with this point. The special envoy, Deborah Lyons, when she came to speak here, said, I'm going to quote her, "We have not had our brains shrunken neither by COVID nor by social media. We are capable of holding two thoughts in our brain. It is possible to be pro-Israeli and pro-Palestinian at the same time. Canadians have that capacity." As universities, you are there to help foster respectful dialogue, disagreement. What are the universities doing to actually broach that problem, which is right now what we're hearing is it's not respectful on campuses?
Well, through you, Madam Chair, I appreciate the question. There's no question that there's a huge amount of work here to do. And I do want to address your point about any kind of gap between what you're hearing from me and what students have said, because that's certainly unintentional. My message to the students who've appeared here is we hear you, and we understand that the experiences you've had are very real, and that we have a lot of work to do to address this situation and improve things. And universities are committed to doing that work. Every day on university campuses, people engage in constructive, respectful dialogue around very difficult issues. But we are seeing some very important examples of us falling short.
I don't have much time, but what we're hearing is that it's not respectful, right? And that people can have very strongly held positions and disagree. But the expression of it, I would think universities, their main role should be in helping model how do we have these conversations.
Yes, I agree. We have a special and particular responsibility in our society to be a place where respectful, open dialogue occurs. And I think picking up on some of what Mr. Sandler said, perhaps in a different context, is we're seeing universities' ability to do that challenged, and we need to up our game. We need to educate ourselves and do a better job of modeling that in a new world where anti-Semitism has morphed into new forms.
Thank you. Just quickly, as a question, anti-Semitism isn't new. We've been hearing that. And the history of anti-Semitism at universities isn't new. And in fact, in our next panel, we will have several universities sitting here who had quotas on the number of Jewish people who could attend certain programs or be in their universities. Do you have an inventory of which universities had that systemic anti-Semitism baked into their policies? And is that not something that needs to be addressed as a going forward piece?
It's an excellent suggestion. What we have is a very good picture of the general situation that existed in Canada. And I think your point is one that I think has been under-discussed, which is this country was saturated in anti-Semitism right up until the 1960s. And one of the contributions that universities had to make first was confronting their own anti-Semitism, which was deep and severe, but also opening the doors to scholars like Irving Abella, who helped document that anti-Semitism and its causes. And that's a huge part of the contribution our institutions need to make going forward.
I don't have much time, so I am going to ask that you talked about sharing best practices in conversations with universities in the UK and US. If you can submit to us what those best practices might be, that would be helpful. Mr. Sandler, I'm really not giving you much time, but I know that you did put in a letter trying to foster that respectful dialogue. Can you just tell us a bit about that work and how we can do better?
Sure. So this was built upon an initiative that was started by the University of Ottawa Faculty of Law,
30 seconds.
Muslim and Jewish law associations. So I built on that, and we've created a national respectful dialogue initiative that 2,500 members of the legal community have signed up on. And the idea is now we're operationalizing that, so we will have respectful dialogues on our campuses.
7 seconds.
Oh my God. Can you please then submit, I know that you said you were having future conversations as part of that respectful dialogue thing. Can you please submit anything that you're doing so that we can also provide it to the universities?
Monsieur Fortin, pour 2 minutes et demie, s'il vous plaît.
Mr. Fortin, 2.5 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Miller, I have a question for you, Mr. Miller. Of course, we can understand the intent here to fight anti-Semitism. Hate speech is unacceptable in Canada. Now, we also know that there are values that are important, for example, freedom of expression, freedom of opinion, and these values can come face to face in this type of discussion. How do you see finding a balance between freedom of opinion, freedom of expression, and fighting hate speech in public? Mr. Miller.
Merci beaucoup pour la question.
Thank you for the question. It's very important.
Would make on this is that we often talk about academic freedom and freedom of expression as being in balance with the need for respect and for preventing discrimination. But I think it's also important to see how much these complement each other. The message we've been hearing talking to Jewish students and scholars is that one of the consequences of not equally applying codes of conduct and other policies is it deprives them of their academic freedom and their proper freedom of expression. And that's when a university and our society begins to really experience difficulties because it's premised on all people having those freedoms.
Merci. Monsieur Sandler, pour quelques...
Thank you. Mr. Sandler, for 20 seconds on the same question, please.
So I've provided you an article that I wrote on the distinction between protected speech and hate speech. But I want to say simply, there are clear demarcations between the two. And the example that I usually give is that if someone wants to criticize Israel's policies, its practices, the conduct of its government, and so on and so forth, that's contemplated by the IHRA definition as not being anti-Semitic. and a democracy should welcome that. And I can tell you, as a member of the Jewish community, I've been sharply critical of the Israeli government where it's appropriate. The difference is when one says all Zionists are racist, all Zionists are evil, Israel should be wiped off the map. That transcends protected speech, and now we're in the realm of hate speech.
Merci, Monsieur Sandler.
For the final 2.5 minutes, please, to Mr. Garrison.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I had some different ideas about where I was going to go this morning, but I want to go back to Mr. Sandler. What we see is, stepping away from the narrow university context, a failure to prosecute hate crimes generally when it comes to anti-Semitic hate crimes. And I wonder whether you would speculate, maybe, is not the right word, but about why we see that failure. Is there a fault in the law, or is it something more pervasive than a fault in the law where we don't see prosecutions that we might see if another group were involved?
Well, it's a great question, and thank you for it. So for me, there's a multi-factored answer to it. The first is that I think that people genuinely don't understand anti-Semitism. And I think with the lack of understanding of anti-Semitism comes a lack of understanding of where the boundaries have been crossed and a criminal offense has been committed. So for me, it's back to the training and education that we've talked about. It's back to having dedicated prosecutors who are dealing with these issues every day. And it's back to having a national strategy so that people actually understand what this is all about. Part of it, unfortunately, is latent anti-Semitism. And I'm not suggesting that decisions not to prosecute I would lightly attribute to someone being anti-Semitic. Because I think ignorance is the bigger problem here when it comes to prosecutions and police. But that definitely does exist. And the third thing that I think is of critical importance is that freedom of speech is now being weaponized and deliberately distorted in a way that inhibits prosecution. So for example, when I say here that the celebration of barbarity by Hamas is not protected speech. When I say here that by any means necessary is not protected speech, then I will be accused of Islamophobia. And I will be accused of propagating hatred, completely misunderstanding or distorting where those boundaries are. And as I said, I've worked with members of the Muslim community. I've been involved in Muslim-Jewish dialogue. But that distortion is contributing to the inhibition to prosecute the legitimate cases.
Thank you very much to our witnesses. As the chair, I've got one quick question to the police. You talked in your recommendation about hate crime, the Online Harms Act that's been introduced, Bill C-63, attempts to enshrine the definition of hatred in the criminal code. I'd like to know if you support that or if you have any recommendation on it. And before you answer that, I will say to all our witnesses, please submit anything in writing that you feel that you did not get a chance to get out here this morning. So just maybe 30 seconds to the police on specifically on the hate crime definition.
So I've just recently reviewed Bill C-63, the Online Harms Act, and I do support it.
Okay, thank you very much. We will now say thank you for coming this morning. We will now deal with the second panel. I've just been informed by the clerk that we are expecting votes. I will ask when the time comes for unanimous consent to continue with the second panel until time to vote, and then you folks can think about that and let me know if you are willing to give consent. So with that, I will suspend for 1 minute to ensure the next witnesses are ready. I now want to welcome our witnesses for the second panel. Please take your seats, members. We have witnesses by video conference and witnesses in the room in person. Again, I remind you to please wait until I recognize you by name before speaking, and that all comments to be addressed through the chair, and we will have 5 minutes each. We have 4 witnesses for the second panel. We will start with Dr. Graham Kerr, President and Vice Chancellor of Concordia University, for the first 5 minutes, please.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to speak on behalf of Concordia University. Concordia has 50,000 students and staff, and our downtown campus is on 2 of the busiest streets in Montreal. Nous accueillons des étudiantes et étudiants.
We welcome students from every corner of the globe. This diversity is an asset for us. We are proud of our Jewish community, which has shaped Concordia's identity and achievements throughout its history. We are also proud of our Palestinian, Arab, and Muslim communities. They, too, contribute to Concordia's character and its many achievements.
Attacks by Hamas on Israel and the subsequent war in Gaza have exposed divisions in Canadian society, which are also reflected at Concordia.